Widower rancher finds injured mother and 4 kids in his wagon, unaware they'll change his life forever. The wind rose quiet and cold that morning, curling through the broken slats of the barn like a prayer half-whispered. Harlan McRae stepped through frost-rusted grass, boots thudding low against the earth. He hadn't spoken to another soul in days, and the silence suited him fine. The barn door creaked on its hinge as he pushed it open, his breath clouding white in the dim. He meant to check on the mare who'd foaled last week, but something pulled him off course. A rustle, faint, almost swallowed by the wind, but not quite. His eyes narrowed. Something shifted near the wagon he parked in the corner last fall. Its bed half filled with hay meant for winter stock. The second sound stopped him cold. A stifled cough. Small child small. Harlan's brow furrowed. He approached slowly, his shadow stretching long across the dirt floor. Another rustle came, then stillness. He reached the wagon and lifted the canvas cover. Fingers steady, though his gut churned. There, half buried in the hay and clinging to one another like leaves after frost, were 4 children. They didn't scream, didn't move, just stared, eyes too large for their hollow faces. One girl, the oldest maybe, had her arms wrapped around the others protectively, her chin lifted with a trembling kind of defiance. A boy with windburned cheeks blinked slow as if expecting a blow. The smallest girl sucked her thumb, her face smeared with soot, and the boy farthest back, no older than 5, just buried his face in the girl's side. Harlan didn't speak. He took a step back and looked beyond them into the wagon shadows. They barely visible in the dim. A woman lay slumped on her side, one arm crooked awkwardly across her stomach. Her dress was torn, blood crusted at the hem of her sleeve. She was breathing barely. He exhaled. In his 36 years, Harlan had buried a wife and a stillborn child. He had fought off wolves, flood, and men with worse intentions. But something about the sight of those children, starving, silent, and wrapped around each other like they'd grown from the same root, shook him deeper than he liked to admit. He didn't ask questions. He didn't curse. He just turned and fetched a blanket, a lantern, and a kettle of cold beans left from the night before. By the time he returned, the children hadn't moved. "Y'all hungry?" he asked, his voice low, but not unkind. The oldest girl blinked once. That was answer enough. He climbed into the wagon, slow, boots scuffing hay, and draped the blanket over the woman. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then closed again. "You there, Ma?" he asked. She nodded barely. "Laura?" she whispered. "Oh, Donald." That was all she gave before slipping back under. Harlan lifted her carefully. She didn't weigh more than a sack of oats. He noticed the way her children flinched when he moved, especially the little one, who buried his face again like shame was his second skin. He didn't comment, just nodded to the eldest girl. "Bring your brothers and sister cabins warm." The walk back was short, but felt longer with 6 silent footsteps trailing behind. He didn't look back, but he heard them. Bare feet brushing brittle grass, the soft sniffling of the girl who'd been sucking her thumb. Inside the cabin, the fire had gone low. He stoked it with practiced ease, then laid the woman, Laura, on the couch, covering her with a quilt his wife had made the winter before she died. The children stood in a corner, like shadows that didn't want to stay. "Table's clean," he said. "Sit." They didn't move at first. Then one by one they approached. No smiles, no words, just a hunger, so quiet it felt like reverence. He filled bowls with beans and handed out the last 4 pieces of cornbread from the lard. The youngest boy dropped his fork twice. The girl, Ellie, he would learn later, took his hand to help him. No one asked for more. No one dared. Harlan didn't eat. He watched their faces, their hands, their eyes, their scars. Once they were done, they sat motionless like birds, not sure if the storm had passed. He spoke to the girl again. "You got names?" "Ellie," she said. "He's Roy. That's June. The littlest is Toby." Their voices were sanded thin. He nodded. "You're safe here." She blinked, her mouth pressed tight. "You don't know us." "No," he said. "But I know what cold does to a child and what bruises mean on a woman." That silenced her. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window panes. The smell of wood smoke clung to everything, settling into the worn floorboards, the tattered coats. The ghost of memory still folded in the corners of the room. Laura stirred once, but didn't wake. Later, Harlan carried water in from the well, heated it, and gestured to the basin. "Let the little ones wash up. I'll take laundry to the barn." Ellie hesitated, then obeyed. The others followed her lead. Harlan gathered their torn, dirty garments in a bundle, each one smaller than the last. The girl's dress had bloodstains. The boy's shirt had been sewn and resewn with threadbare patches. No child should have worn things like that, Not even in this land, where God's silence sometimes stretched for miles. By the time he returned, the children were asleep on a pallet by the fire, curled around each other again like they feared separation. Laura still hadn't stirred. Heron watched her chest rise and fall. Slow-labored. He sat down across from her, took off his hat, and laid it on the table. He poured himself black coffee and stared into the fire. Not for answers, just for company. He wasn't a man given to asking for much. The land didn't care about prayers, and neither did the cold. But watching them there, ragged and burned out by whatever storm they'd come from, something in his chest felt unfamiliar. Not pity, not even charity, something older. Maybe it was the echo of a crib that had never been used. Maybe it was the ghost of laughter that hadn't graced this house in years. Maybe it was just the way the girl had placed her little brother's hand on her own chest to calm him, like a mother too young and too tired. He didn't know yet, but he knew one thing. Whatever had happened to them wasn't finished, and whatever it was coming. He looked to the window as the fire cracked behind him. The frost on the glass had begun to melt into streaks. Something had shifted in his home, in his bones, and outside in the growing wind. The world felt like it was about to knock. Laura came to with a slow ache of pain wrapped in warmth. A fire hissed low somewhere near. Her head was cradled against something soft, unfamiliar. She opened her eyes, breath catching at the unfamiliar rafters, the faded quilt drawn over her, the smell of pine pitch and smoke curling through the room. Her first thought wasn't of herself. It was the children. She sat upright too fast, and the room swayed, bootsteps on wood. Harlan turned from the stove, a tin cup in his hand. He didn't speak, just walked over, crouched beside her like he might have spooked Colt, and handed her the cup. Drink. The heat steadied her, coffee strong and bitter. Her hands shook. He noticed. She tucked them beneath the quilt, hiding the bruised wrist beneath fabric. His eyes followed the movement, but he didn't ask. Your kids are asleep. Ate good. Thank you, she said, voice barely more than breath. He nodded once and rose, returning to the fire. The room was hushed, like grief had pulled a blanket over the air. Her gaze drifted to the corner where June slept, with her thumb pressed against her chin. Toby curled beside her. Roy lay on his stomach, knees pulled under his chest. Ellie slept like a watchman back against the wall, one hand on a broom handle beside her. They'd survived worse than cold. Laura tried to rise, but the pain in her side held her down. She winced. Her arm throbbed and her fingers tingled. Harlan noticed again. You're busted up. Don't move more than you have to. I can work, she said quickly. I don't expect charity. I didn't offer any. She blinked at that. I offered fire, food, and 4 plates. That's not the same. There was no edge in his voice, just a plain kind of truth that couldn't be argued with. He walked out then, not bothering with a coat, and left her alone with her shame. The room creaked in his absence. Laura sat still, listening to the wind and the breathing of her children. Her fingers pressed gently into her arm. The bruise was blooming darker now. She could still hear Jonah's voice in her mind, mocking cruel. She closed her eyes and swallowed down the fear. By the time Harlan returned, her feet were on the floor, and the quilt was folded neatly. She stood when he stepped through the door, despite the dizzy lurch it cost her. You don't need to prove nothing, he said, hanging his coat. I wasn't. He said nothing, but walked to the small chest near the hearth and pulled out a folded dress, plain, worn, but clean. He placed it on the table. Was my wife's? You can take it in if you know how. Laura nodded. She held the fabric close for a moment longer than she meant to. She recognized the kind of woman who'd worn it. A practical, decent woman who didn't need lace to make a life. I can sew, she said. He grunted. That'll help. The hours passed in quiet rhythm. The children woke, ate porridge, and helped around the cabin. Roy followed Harlan to the barn with quiet curiosity. Ellie swept the floor twice. Laura noticed June standing on a chair to wash dishes without being asked. No one gave orders. They simply worked like creatures who knew the value of being allowed to stay. Laura scrubbed the table, favoring her right arm. Harlan returned from the barn and watched her from the doorway. She didn't stop. You're hurting, he said. I'm used to it. That ain't how things ought to be. Her throat tightened. She turned away, hands working faster. He didn't press. Instead, he walked to the stove and stirred the beans she'd left simmering. You cook? I did. For who? My husband. She paused, eyes flicking up until he died. Harlan looked at her, then really looked. She could feel his gaze like weight across her back. Not judging, not pitying, just registering. That bruise you're hiding, he said. Not a question. She stopped scrubbing. Her back straightened. I'm not hiding anything. Don't lie, Laura. She turned to face him, her voice sharp now. You don't know what I've been through. No, he said gently, but I can guess. And I don't need the whole of it to understand. You're scared. Her jaw trembled before she bit down hard. She didn't want to cry in front of a stranger, especially one with hands that big and quiet eyes that saw too much. I'll pull my weight, she said. We won't be a burden. You ain't. The silence between them stretched. The children watched from the edge of the room, pretending not to. Toby had his head on June's shoulder. Roy stood near the window, chewing a bit of wood. Ellie, as ever, studied everything. Later that afternoon, Harlan saddled his horse to ride into town. Laura offered to come. He shook his head. Rest your arm. I'll be back before sundown. She nodded, pretending she wasn't grateful. In town, Harlan bought flour, salt, a bar of soap, and 2 sticks of peppermint. At the counter, Mrs. Headley raised an eyebrow. You feeding a crowd these days? He didn't answer. Her smile turned sly. You know folks are talking. Say you took in a woman off the road. Widow, with bastards, I heard. He met her chazeflet. You hear the wind whistling through your roof at night? She blinked, caught off guard. I suppose so. Then you know what cold is, and you ought to know better than to talk. He paid and walked out, the peppermint sticks tucked inside his coat pocket. Back at the cabin, Laura watched the snow begin to fall, light like powdered sugar across the field. The children had cleaned the table. Ellie braided June's hair while Roy read aloud from a ragged book. Toby sat on the floor with a wooden spoon, drumming softly. Laura held the dress in her lap and began mending the seams, fingers working despite the ache. She didn't notice when Heron stepped inside. He placed the bag on the counter. Then from his pocket, he pulled the peppermint and set 1 stick in June's lap, the other in Toby's. No words. Laura stared at him. Just something sweet, he said. Not a promise. She nodded once, lips pressing together. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Laura stood by the hearth, the mended dress hanging nearby. You didn't have to stand up for me in town. I didn't do it for you. She looked at him then. Hard. Searching. He met her gaze without flinching. I did it for them. Her eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. Instead, she sat beside the fire, cradling her arm. The bruises still bloomed beneath her sleeve, but something else had begun to shift beneath skin, beneath sorrow, and she knew with a flicker of fear and fragile hope that the past might yet come looking for them. But maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't find them without a fight. The snow had eased into a hush so soft it felt like breath. Each morning, the world outside came dressed in white, as if the land was trying to forget itself. Inside Harlan's cabin, warmth had returned, not loud or sudden, but in small sacred ways. The clink of tin cups, the rustle of broom bristles, the murmur of bedtime stories told in a woman's voice that no longer cracked with shame. Laura stirred the pot gently, careful not to favor her arm, though it still ached in the mornings. The stew simmered. She didn't glance over when Harlan stepped in with an armful of split logs. His coat was dusted with snow, beard flecked silver like frost had taken root in him. Storm's moving west, he said, placing the wood beside the hearth. We'll be spared the worst. Laura nodded. Then the animals will stay dry. You've been watching them every day. They trust me now, mostly. He half smiled. Goats don't trust nobody. Just tolerate us. Laura nearly smiled back. But the moment passed. She ladled stew into bowls, hands steady despite the sting in her wrist. The scars were healing, the bruises fading. But her body still remembered how quick harm had come before. The children burst in then, boots wet, cheeks red from cold. Roy helped Ellie shake off her coat, careful as a little man. June dragged in a crooked stick shaped like a gooseneck, and Toby clung to Laura's skirt, silent as always, but calmer now. They ate with the quiet hunger of children who'd once known what it meant to go without. Harlan watched them. He rarely spoke during meals, but his presence had shifted. Softer somehow, less like a stone in the corner, and more like the beam holding up the roof. After supper, Roy helped with saddles in the barn. Ellie mended socks with tiny, neat stitches. June pressed flowers between pages of a Bible older than she was. Laura, arms dusted with flour, baked biscuits without measuring a thing. She moved with a gentle purpose now, not because the past had vanished, but because this place hadn't sent her back to it. At night, when the children were asleep, she sat by the fire and asked Harlan, "How long were you alone?" He didn't answer right away, poked the embers instead, then leaned back in his chair. 3 years since she passed. Another 2 before that she got sick. Hard years. Silent. I'm sorry. He nodded like that was enough. Laura looked down at her hands. They'd been calloused by work and softened by butter and soap again. She swallowed. I used to hum to myself when I cooked, she said, back when life was normal. But Jonah hated music. Said it made a woman lazy. Harlan's jaw tensed, then eased. He sounds like a coward dressed in man's clothes. She blinked. He's my brother-in-law. Still a coward. She looked into the fire and didn't argue. The next morning, Ellie found the letter on the porch, tucked into the crack of the door, sealed with wax. Harren opened it slowly, eyes scanning the clean, cruel script from Jonah. He read it once, then again, then folded it neat and slid it into his coat. Laura saw the shift in him immediately. "What is it?" "Your past," he said, voice like gravel. "Come in for what it thinks it still owns." Her knees weakened. "What did he say?" "He's filed with the county. Claims you're unfit. That the children ain't yours to keep." She shook her head, hands trembling. "No, he can't. He's nothing. He never even touched them unless it was to discipline. They cried when he came near. He don't see it that way. What happens now?" Harlan didn't answer. She stepped back, anger rising through her fear. "We'll leave," she said. "Tonight? I'll take them and go." "Where would you go?" "Doesn't matter. Somewhere without him. Somewhere we won't be found." He crossed the room slowly, steady as mountain roots. "Laura, you can't keep running." She opened her mouth, but he cut her off with quiet finality. "You don't run from fire. You smother it." Her eyes burned. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "I don't need to. I saw enough when you flinched from my hand." She turned from him, covering her face. He didn't touch her. Didn't need to. That evening, Laura packed quietly. She folded the children's clothes, the mended socks, the Bible with dried petals inside. Ellie helped, her small hands shaking as she asked, "Are we going back to Jonah?" "No, baby," Laura whispered. "We're just moving on." Roy refused to put on his coat. June began crying softly. Toby hid beneath the table, refusing to come out. It felt like undoing a fragile spell that had only just begun to take hold. Laura turned toward the door, bag in hand, when Harlan blocked the frame. "You're not leaving. I can't risk it. They need more than a roof. They need peace. You found it. Don't throw it away because a snake's hissed once." She looked down. Her voice cracked. "If he takes them, I won't survive it." "He won't." She looked up, searching his face. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone's got to stand still while others run." The children watched, silent as snowfall. Finally, Laura sat back down. Her bag stayed on the floor. The next morning, Harlan nailed a plank across the porch with iron resolve. The wind blew sharp, but the sky stayed clear. He chopped with like he was splitting bones. Roy stood beside him, mimicking the motion with a stick. Inside, Laura baked again. Cinnamon bread, this time the kind she used to make for birthdays. She didn't sing, but she hummed so soft only June heard. And the little girl smiled in her sleep. That night, Harlan brought in extra firewood and set a shotgun beside the door. Laura watched him from the hearth, brush in hand, smoothing Ellie's hair. "Will it be enough?" she asked. "No, but I will." He didn't explain what he meant. Didn't have to. Later, when the fire burned low and the children slept tangled in quilts, Laura whispered into the dark, "Thank you." He didn't say anything, just sat in his chair, staring at the flame like he was guarding something sacred. Outside, far beyond the trees, the wolves didn't howl. But something else was coming. And this time Laura wouldn't face it alone. The sun rose that morning in a haze of pale gold, lighting the frost-glazed pasture like glass. Laura had been awake long before the rooster crowed. She stood at the sink, hands plunged into cold water, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. Her mind had been still through the night. Too still, the way a field quiets just before storm. Harlan had left the shotgun propped by the door. That alone was proof enough. He was outside already. She could hear him splitting, kindling. The axe's thud, sharp and steady. That sound grounded her even as something in her chest drifted like ash caught in wind. There was a rhythm to safety she'd learned. You measured it in small things. The heat of a good fire, the smell of biscuits baking, the way June clung to her skirt less often now. But safety didn't last forever. Especially not when men like Jonah had found your scent. At mid-morning, a buggy rolled down the road like a wound tightening. The wheels were too polished, the horse too sleek for this rough land. Harlan stood beside the porch as it neared, arms crossed, shoulders squared. Roy and Ellie watched from the barn, hidden between the stalls. Laura stepped outside slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Jonah O'Donnell stepped down from the buggy like he owned the dirt beneath his boots. Behind him stood a lawman Laura didn't recognize. A young sheriff with a badge too new and a gaze too soft. "Afternoon," Jonah said, voice slick with condescension. "Heard you've been playing house." Laura didn't speak. Her breath turned to mist and vanished before it reached him. Harlan said nothing either. His eyes were level, unmoved. The sheriff cleared his throat. Got word filed in town. Mr. O'Donnell here is claiming custody of the children on grounds of kinship. And she ain't fit. Jonah cut in. That arm's still healing. Those kids of hers look like strays. Ain't safe. Laura stepped forward. Every part of her trembling, but her voice. You never cared if they were safe. They're family, and family comes home. Harlan stepped forward. Then what you call home is what they fled. Jonah's eyes narrowed. And who are you to speak? I'm the man who fed them, sheltered them, watched them sleep through a winter storm without fear. The sheriff looked between them, unsure. I'm just here to do what's lawful, and I'm here to do what's right, Harlan said. Laura felt her knees weaken, but she stood taller. They're mine, not his. Blood doesn't make you a father. The sheriff winced. Without papers, marriage, or custody, you've got no standing. Laura looked to Harlan. He stared at her for a long breath, then turned to the sheriff. Let me fix that. She blinked. What? He stepped onto the porch, voice carrying low and firm. Preacher's on his way. Jonah scoffed. You think some backwoods wedding's going to change legal facts? Harlan ignored him. Laura felt something surge through her, wild and unexpected. She looked at him, searching for irony, for pressure. There was none. Just a quiet offer. I never asked you for anything, she said. I'm not asking you now, just standing where I said I would. Jonah rolled his eyes. This is madness. No, Laura said. This is mercy. The sheriff looked torn. He's not wrong. A union would change the terms. Harlan met Laura's eyes. You don't have to love me. Her voice shook. I already trust you. That's rarer. The children came from the barn, then walking slow, quiet as sap, rising through spring branches. Ellie stood tall, shin up. Roy clutched her sleeve. June and Toby stayed close behind. They didn't ask what was happening. Somehow they knew. An hour later, the preacher arrived. A simple man in a dusty coat. He stepped down, Bible in hand, offering no grand sermon, just the dignity of presence. Laura wore the blue dress Harlan's wife had once folded into a cedar chest. It had been hanging by the hearth for weeks, waiting. Harlan smoothed his hair with water, wore a clean shirt, and stood like he'd been carved from stone. The children stood in a line beside them, Ellie holding a bundle of wildflowers, Roy fidgeting with his collar. June clutched Lorazum. Toby held one of Harlan's fingers with surprising trust. There was no crowd, no celebration, just snow falling in soft flakes, clinging to the preacher's shoulders as he read vows that felt less like promises and more like shelter. Laura's voice wavered once, but never broke. When it was done, Harlan didn't kiss her. He only took her hand in both of his, slow and deliberate, and held it like something sacred. Jonah sneered from the buggy. That's what you think will stop me? A cabin wedding and a preacher with no teeth. Harlan stepped down from the porch. The marriage license rolled in one hand. Law says you can't take a man's wife's children without proof he's unfit. You have none. Jonah's face reened. I'll be back with rich proper ones. You come back with threats, Harlan said, and you'll find more than papers waiting. The sheriff raised a hand. Enough. This has gone far enough for today. Let the courts sort the rest. He turned, face troubled, and climbed into the buggy. Jonah hesitated, then followed, shooting one last glare at Laura. I should have buried you with my brother, he hissed. Laura didn't flinch. I'm not the one who needs burying, she said. They rode off in silence. Back inside, the cabin felt both unchanged and completely transformed. Laura stood near the fire, her children crowded around her, clinging with quiet gratitude. Harlan stood a few paces away, shoulders loose now, less braced. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I did for them. For you. She looked at him, eyes glossy. Thank you. He nodded. Now it's your name on the land ledger and theirs. She blinked at that. Tomorrow, he said, we'll go to town. Make it official. She smiled faintly for the first time without pain wrapped around it. Outside, the sun was setting behind bare trees. The horizon burned orange like the sky itself had been scrubbed raw. That night, Laura sat beside the bed, brushing June's hair. Ellie leaned against the wall, half asleep. Roy snored soft. Toby held her hand, even in sleep. Harlan watched from the doorway, something unreadable in his gaze. He didn't step closer, just turned and tended to the fire. Laura laid down slowly, her body unfamiliar with rest that wasn't stained by fear. And just before sleep claimed her, she whispered into the dark. Maybe it's not where you run that matters. And in the stillness, with wind against the glass and fire crackling low, the thought finished itself in her mind. Maybe it's who stays beside you when the running ends. The wind changed before the trouble came. It began as a silence too deep for mourning, the kind that swallows even birdsong. The snow outside was clean and brittle underfoot. The sky bone white with no promise of sun. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. Laura moved through the morning like a woman still learning what peace felt like in her bones. Her apron was dusted with flour. Toby clung to her hip as she stirred batter while June and Roy stacked kindling by the hearth. Harlan sat at the table carving a spoon from hickory, his hands quiet and sure. Across from him, Ellie read aloud, her voice halting, but proud. It was a scene Laura would remember forever, not because it was grand, but because it was whole, nothing missing, no fear. Then came the echo of hooves. More than one. Harlan stood without looking out the window. The rhythm was too familiar, too deliberate. Laura's hands paused midst her. Ellie stopped reading. Roy moved to the window without a word. The air shifted. 2 wagons, 6 men, Jonah among them. The sheriff wasn't with them this time. Laura felt the weight of her past crawl up her spine. Her throat went dry. "I'll go," she whispered. "No," Harlan said. He walked to the door and opened it before they had time to knock. Jonah dismounted, wearing a long black coat and a smirk that stank of power. "Got it this time," he said, waving a paper. "Signed and stamped. Judge out of Red Bluff owed me a favor." Laura stepped into view. Her voice didn't tremble. "Favor doesn't make truth." "It does on paper." Jonah's eyes glinted. "You married rancher. Clever. But it won't hold. Not against writs that say the children are mine to claim. They're not yours." She said they're kin. "You never fed them. Never kissed a fevered forehead. Never lost sleep over their nightmares. That don't matter to a judge." Harlan stepped forward. "What matters here is what's right." Jonah turned to his men. "Take them." They hesitated. Harlan's frame filled the doorway like a barn beam. Behind him, the fire cast long shadows. "I'd think twice," he said, voice low. "You'll stop 6 of us," Jonah sneered. "Don't need to, just need to make it cost." Laura stepped forward, fingers trembling. Not with fear, but with something older, deeper. "Jonah," she said softly, "when you used to come round, I never looked you in the eye. You thought it meant I was afraid of you." "You were," he said. "No," she replied. "I was disgusted." That silenced him for a beat. The men behind him shifted uneasily. Laura's voice grew steadier. "You tied my husband's death around my neck like a noose. You called me a burden. And now you want the children you cast aside to polish your name." She walked forward until she stood between the men in the house. "You don't want them. You want ownership. You want control." One of the younger men behind Jonah, a wiry man with wind-chapped lips, spoke up. "She ain't wrong, Jonah. You never said nothing about raising no kids." Jonah turned. "You work for me, Will." "Not her." Will glanced at Laura, then at Harlan, then down at the snow. He stepped back. Jonah's jaw clenched. "Cowards. All of you." Another man stepped away, then a third. By the time Harlan raised his hand, only 2 remained at Jonah's side, and neither looked sure. "You can leave now," Harlan said, "or you can bury the rest of your pride here." Jonah's breath steamed in the cold. "You think this is over?" "No," Laura said. "It's just beginning, but not in your favor." Jonah's glare fell on the children. Ellie with her chin high, Roy gripping a length of rope like it was a weapon, June behind the door, holding the family Bible like a shield. Toby still pressed against Laura's skirt, silent but calm. Jonah mounted his horse again. "You'll regret this." Laura shook her head. "Not this. Never this." He rode off alone. The wind carried his absence across the land like a final exhale. Inside, Laura fell to her knees. Not from weakness, but from the weight lifted. Harlan came to her side. She didn't cry. She only leaned against him, eyes closed. The fire behind them flickered gold against the log walls. Later that evening, the children played a game with pebbles by the hearth. Ellie told a story she made up on the spot about a queen who lived in a house that never had locks. June laughed for the first time in days. Roy whittled a stick into something that might become a horse. Toby curled up in Laura's lap, thumb and mouth, utterly at peace. Harlan stood at the window, watching the sky turn indigo. Snow fell again, soft and slow. "She's strong," he said quietly. Laura didn't look up. "Ellie, you." She met his eyes. "I was scared. And still, you stood between your children and a monster." She looked into the fire, thoughtful. "Maybe standing isn't the same as not being afraid. Maybe it's standing because you are." He nodded. She ran her fingers through Toby's hair. "I used to wonder if God saw us out here." Harlan's voice was gentle. "He sees. But maybe he waits to see what we'll do first." That night, Laura tucked the children in while Heron sat by the door with the rifle across his lap. Not out of fear, but as a ritual. A gesture that said, "Not again." She stepped over, standing in the quiet glow of the hearth. You didn't have to marry me to protect them. I didn't marry you for them. She blinked. I married you for what you are, he said. Steady, brave, honest, and for what you've made this place again. Her voice caught. What have I made it? He reached for her hand. Home. No kisses, no declarations, just hands held like something ancient, something holy. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the fire warmed them all. Before the lamp was blown out, Laura whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years. Not for safety or rescue, but gratitude. And as her eyes closed, she knew deep down the war was over. But the healing had only begun. Now, if this story moves something quiet inside you, there's another one waiting right beside it. Click the next video. It's even more stirring than this one. You'll remember it long after the snow melts. Go ahead,